Unless you've been hiding under a rock, you know that the biggest story in the news right now is coming out of the state of Colorado, where former President Donald Trump, without being convicted of a crime and without a judge and a jury, had a Supreme Court rule that he was guilty and must be removed from the presidential ballot. To better understand this, I have former Representative Dave Williams on today to help me understand what's going on in Colorado and how this affects the rest of the nation. Dave, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you probably have a pulse for the people in Colorado, maybe not the Democrat side, although I'm sure you rub shoulders with them on a daily basis. What is the feeling among Republican voters having their former president removed from the presidential ballot for a crime he's never been convicted of committing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's shock because this is actually bigger than Donald Trump. This is an attack on our very fundamental principle of free and fair elections that we have in this country. Folks are upset because it's pretty obvious that we should be respecting the notion of one man, one vote. We're the ones as voters who should be deciding which candidates are appropriate, not some unelected government bureaucrat or court dictating to us who we may vote for. That's un-American. It's undemocratic. And as the Republican chairman of the state of Colorado, what we're seeing is a lot of folks step up, wanting to know how they can help, what they can do to defend their right to vote, and more importantly, defend the rights of other folks across the country for them to vote. Because if this decision is allowed to stand, it's going to be replicated all across the country in other states. You're going to see secretaries of state that are just as corrupt as the one we have in Colorado try to remove Donald Trump from the ballot. You're going to see other court cases pop up to try and remove Donald Trump, from the ballot. In fact, you're seeing situations like that in California right now, and even in places like as on the coast of Maine, right? You're seeing that happen. So we're on the front lines here, and we're doing everything we can to beat it back. But the stakes are high, and the consequences are dire if we don't successfully fight this.
Yeah, and you mentioned that this is bigger than Donald Trump, and I agree with you because let's be honest. There's people that love Donald Trump in the state of Colorado, but the state ended up going to Joe Biden. It's predominantly, a more Democrat state, but it's the principle of the fact that even within a state that he may or may not lose in the future, people should have the right to vote their conscience. They have this constitutional protection to be able to vote for the man or the woman that they want to see running the country. And so to have that stripped from them does appear to be a form of election interference, especially where their main tenet for removing him was a crime he's never been convicted of. So do you see that as a similar thing, even though Colorado voted, predominantly blue for Joe Biden last time? Uh, the red voters should at least have the opportunity to vote for who they want.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I think what you're seeing is a desperate attempt by Democrats, not only in the state but nationally, to eliminate the competition. And this shouldn't be a surprise. They did this with RFK Jr. This go around. They did it with Bernie Sanders last go around. There's something about the Democrat establishment that just doesn't like to compete, and they don't want candidates or their ideas fairly adjudicated in the marketplace or the court of public opinion. So by hook or by crook, they do whatever they can to simply just limit options and eliminate choices. And that's what's so consequential about what's happening right now. You had four unelected judges from Colorado who were appointed by the opposition party, who basically gave the middle finger to the American public and said, "We know better. We shouldn't leave this to you. You don't get to decide which candidates are proper. We do." And they're using a trumped up, no pun intended, a trumped up charge against Donald Trump to remove him from the ballot when he's never been charged nor convicted of a crime. The best thing your listeners or viewers can remember is that Jack Smith, the lead prosecutor against Donald Trump, chose not to charge him with insurrection. If he didn't think he had a case on insurrection, then you know darn well that this is a bogus claim, and it's one that should be overturned very quickly. And we hope the United States Supreme Court will do it. We're a party to the case, by the way. I don't think a lot of people understand that the
Okay.
Republican Party is also adjudicating this. We did it at the district level. We were there at the Colorado Supreme Court level as well. Now, what we're doing is we're preparing to file our appeal to the United States Supreme Court. We hope to have cert granted to us very quickly, given the fact that our primary election is going to happen on March 5th. But ultimately, we don't know what's going to happen. We thought we would lose on the district level, which we didn't. It was still a bad ruling because of the findings of fact. If your viewers don't know, the district court ruled that Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection. He didn't, but that's the decision that the left wing judge made, but allowed him to stay on the ballot. And then the Colorado Supreme Court, we thought wouldn't change that. We thought ultimately Trump would be left on the ballot. We got that wrong. So the Trump team and our team, we're 0 for 2 in predicting court outcomes. So I want to stress this to everyone. The United States Supreme Court, I think, would want to resolve this, because if they don't, it's a constitutional crisis. It's chaos all across the country. But we don't know, specifically because you have people like Justice John Roberts, who, for whatever reason, doesn't always come to the same good conclusion that he should. And if you want any sort of proof of that, or a good example of that, look at Obamacare. He had the ability to overturn that and put it to bed way back when it was 2012, I believe, when that came up. He didn't do it. Instead he made a ruling that kept it alive. So I just want to stress to your viewers that just because the Supreme Court of the United States is taking it up, and because 6 of those justices were appointed by Republican presidents, it's not a guarantee that we're going to win.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point for people to remember. Also, you pointed out that the justices that took it upon themselves to judge and block Donald Trump are not voted in. They're assigned. And so the other thing that was really interesting about the justices that I read was the ones that voted that Trump was an insurrectionist that must be removed because of the 14th Amendment. They all went to Ivy League schools.
Yeah.
The 3, I think it were, that voted against it and gave a dissenting opinion, they all went to like local Colorado schools. And so even though they're all Democrat, the ones that went to local schools that stayed connected to Colorado roots, they're like, wait a minute, no, this disenfranchises millions and millions of people in Colorado, where the Ivy League schools that think like Washington, D.C. folks, that think like pro-Hamas, protesters versus protecting Israel protesters, these people decided that Donald Trump needed to be removed. I just think it's kind of interesting that, I mean, you could cut it right down, Ivy League school versus regular school, which way they voted. Do you think that these Ivy Leagues are infiltrating the minds of the youth and pushing them towards more socialist, communist thought patterns?
Yeah, of course. I mean, is the Pope Catholic? Is water wet? Do birds fly? Yes, it's an indictment against our Ivy League institutions. Uh, I mean, it's the coastal elites. It's the trust fund babies who have nothing better to do than try to figure out how to muck up Western civilization, that are further indoctrinated by these Ivy League institutions that are really harming this country. The best thing people can do, especially those who have children, is don't automatically think that you need to send your kids to college, especially Ivy League institutions. What we're finding, I think, nationally, and it was a bit off topic, but it's important, is that college is a waste of time, energy, and money. And more likely than not, your children are going to be indebted, or yourself, you're going to be indebted with a worthless piece of diploma that won't translate into a good job or a good career in the future. So, the best thing you could do is, if you're going to go to college, go to one of the lesser known colleges or public institutions that have a better track record. And getting back to the decision from the Colorado Supreme Court, what I thought was interesting was that they're all Democrat appointed, all of them, all seven of those
Yeah.
justices, and it was this close of a decision, right? That tells you that the Democrats, at least the reasonable ones, understand that this was a big overreach. They jumped the shark by doing this, and I think that was reflected in their dissenting opinions. They pointed out what you and I just talked about with respect to there being no charge or conviction of Donald Trump on insurrection, and that's a violation of due process. And that's sort of getting lost in this discussion because we're rightfully focusing on the assault against free and fair elections and our ability to vote for whoever we want. But we're also forgetting that there's an attack on due process right now. Essentially, the district court judge in Colorado, and then reaffirmed by the Colorado Supreme Court, um, ruled that Donald Trump engaged in quote an insurrection without a proper trial, without proper cross examination, without enough time to go through the mountain of evidence that was there, and it wasn't even done by a jury. It was a bench ruling, or I shouldn't say a bench ruling because she wrote it, but it was a bench trial with a ruling by one individual that was appointed by a Democrat who had a history of donating to organizations that wanted some sort of accountability towards those who participated in January 6th. It was a corrupt kangaroo court from the very beginning, and in that regard, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I am very surprised that anyone would think that the way to adjudicate this is to take away the choice of the voters. That should be sacrosanct. We shouldn't be violating that sacred right of voting because that's what, in part at least, makes this country great. We resolve our political disputes and disagreements at the ballot box, not through any other means, especially violent means. But once you take that away, I shudder to think what will happen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, you're a big leader there in the Republican Party in Colorado. Has there been any discussion between you and your colleagues on whether there's some kind of, I don't even want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but like some kind of behind the scenes plan? Because with the lower courts, they ruled, okay, he can be on the ballot. They're, you know, they checked off all of these boxes as if they were really giving a fair thing. But then she writes in her opinion, but he did engage in insurrectionist activity, right? He was a participant. He was part of it, maybe not the ringleader or whatever. And you leave it, and everybody's like, okay, great, this is great. And then not long after that, they pick up on that part on the Supreme Court state level, and that ends up being the thing that they use to remove him. It almost seems like the lower courts were teeing the higher court up for the bigger takedown. Am I looking into this too much? Have you guys talked about that at all?
No, no, you're actually spot on. You can even go before that. The organization that brought this together, its crew, it's Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, something like that acronym. Don't believe their lovey-dovey, name. It's a ruse. It's a dark money group funded by George Soros. They started shopping for courts around the country way before this. In fact, they had put out communications to Democrat secretaries of state, probably some Republicans too, but definitely Democrat secretaries of state, including our one here, about how Donald Trump could not be on the ballot because of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. They had been planning this for a long time, so they had developed this theory that they would then shop to the most sympathetic courts, Colorado being one of them, and then they presented this argument to Judge Wallace, who she was the district court judge, who was already sympathetic to what they were doing. And I think Judge Wallace correctly understood that since this is a case of first impression, meaning it had never been heard before, it was probably safe for her not to pull the trigger, but at least tee the thing up for the Colorado Supreme Court to do it. Which, from a strategy standpoint, is brilliant, right? Judge Wallace, she didn't get criticized too much about it. Her ruling was ridiculous, but at the end of the day, the result was Donald Trump leaving him on the ballot, and I think she kind of knew that going into it. But she left open the only logical avenue that you could, if you're a Democrat anyway, uh, that you could come to for the Colorado Supreme Court. If Donald Trump actually engaged in insurrection, then how could you not disqualify him under Section 3, Article 14? One of the basic questions that the Supreme Court asked, and I sat there for 2 hours in the Colorado Supreme Court, one of the questions they asked is, okay, Trump team, Colorado Republican team, uh, does the 14th Amendment apply to presidents? And if it doesn't apply to presidents, are you suggesting that Jefferson Davis, post Civil War, he could have ran for president and taken office? That's a tough question, given the context, right? And so you could see, hindsight's 2020 and all, but you could see sort of the questioning that we saw in the Colorado Supreme Court. The only conclusion was he had to be disqualified, and that's why in the findings of fact the district court said he engaged in insurrection, because if he did, there's only one logical conclusion in the minds of those Democrats: it's remove him from the ballot. This was all a setup from the word go, and unfortunately it's gotten to the point where the United States Supreme Court has to step in, because if they don't, then we really will have a constitutional crisis. There will be chaos all around the country. You can't have this type of election manipulation or interference and expect the American people to be okay with it. My hope is that our appeal will win. If it doesn't succeed, then we're going to have to pivot from a presidential primary to a caucus system, which we don't want to do, and we won't do that until we get some clarity from the United States Supreme Court. But come hell or high water, as the chairman of the Colorado Republican Party, fighting on behalf of Colorado Republicans and even Republicans across the country, I'm not going to allow unelected judges, especially those appointed from the opposition party, to tell us who we're going to nominate. That's our right afforded to us by the First Amendment, and specifically with the freedom of association that's attached to it. But ultimately, this is a fundamental issue that I think we need to protect, because if we don't, then you're going to see this happen in the future towards anyone that they don't like. If they can do this to the 45th president of the United States, the leading Republican contender in our primary and probably the likely winner of the 2024 election and the rematch, then they can do it to anyone. Again, I can't state how consequential this is, and I also can't overstate the fact that if we don't succeed, we're in for some dark days ahead. So I need everyone to help us out. We're on the front lines here in Colorado, doing what we can to protect your right to vote for Donald Trump or against him. By the way, you have a right to not support Donald Trump, and that should be something that's protected as well. So help us succeed in this. Come to our website. It's cologop.org. That's cologop.org. And donate. You'll see a link to help us fight this, because we don't have the millions of dollars that these dark money groups or the Democrats have. We're relying on the generosity and faithfulness of a lot of patriots that are listening and watching this program and others as well. If everyone who was watching this or listening to this, if they just chipped in $20, 25, $50, whatever, we would have more than enough to protect your right to vote for or against Donald Trump and ultimately protect our elections here in the country.
Yeah, no, and I see that you guys you're not just fighting for Colorado, you're fighting for Republicans and those, independents that want to vote for Trump, even Democrats that want to switch across the aisle this time, vote this mentally ill president out, who's destroying the country, making it almost unlivable because of inflation and prices rising. But I see you as a David fighting a Goliath. You're an actual David, and we really appreciate that. So thank you for doing that. I don't know if you saw this, but just minutes before we got on, the swing state of Michigan announced that they will keep Donald Trump on the ballot. They said there's no reason to kick him off. He wasn't an officer and hasn't been convicted of any insurrection crime. What are your thoughts on this? Does this give precedence for the higher court, the U.S. Supreme Court, to say, okay, here's a state that has a ruling on why he should be on. Here's another state that has a ruling of why he deserves to be on. Here's Colorado that says why he doesn't deserve to be on. Does that help another state like that coming out in the affirmative, saying, of course he has the right to be voted for or voted against by the American people.
Yeah, I think sort of those contradictions and those conflicts between the states motivates the Supreme Court to step in and render a final ruling. But the question is, what ruling are they gonna give? I think everyone thinks both sides that the Supreme Court will grant cert. The question is, what are they going to do? And you have conservatives who, and even some intellectual left-leaning legal scholars, basically saying, "Hey, this is a slam dunk. The Supreme Court's going to overturn this. And it's all going to be good." But speaking as someone who's been witnessing this for the past several months and been on the ground, I can't say that for 100% certainty. The problem we have in the United States Supreme Court right now is that you have a number of justices led by John Roberts who care more about the quote reputation of the court than they do about executing and implementing the law as written. I'm not so certain that we're gonna get a slam dunk scenario. I hope that's the case. Because it's so obvious to me that the thing to do is to protect our democratic rights, our ability to vote for the candidates we think best. Uh, but again, I hearken back to a number of decisions that were made by the United States Supreme Court with a Republican majority. um, Obamacare is a great example. That should have been overturned, but it wasn't. And then there are countless others that we could go into that should have been overturned or should have been struck down, and they weren't. Uh, so I don't know what's going to happen. That's why we're taking every precaution we can. We're going to give the best defense that we can in the Supreme Court when they have oral arguments. But at the end of the day, we're also not relying on them to make this right. We're going to try and do what we can, and that's why it's so important for your viewers to visit our website at cologop.org and help us in this fight, because it's an all hands on deck moment. And if we can reach critical mass, if we can get people from across the country helping us, then I think we'll succeed. Ultimately, I think we'll win. But we're not through the woods. In fact, I think it might get worse before it gets better.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I'll make sure to leave a link to cologop.com. Those that
Org.
want to, .org, excuse me. I'll have it
Yeah.
correct in the show notes. We want to make sure that those that want to contribute can. I think my big takeaway from this that kind of shocked me, and I think my viewers are going to appreciate you pointing this out, is uh, they've been orchestrating this sinister plan for a long time. They then shopped it around to which court was going to be the most sympathetic for pushing through their agenda. I did not know any of that was going on behind the scenes. So thank you for pointing that out. We have to fight this as if it's not going to go our way, and we have to fight this as if there's evil, sinister plans. There's like 5D chess happening, and the American public thinks, oh, this is just a game of chess. No, this is like deep strategic, in the dark, behind closed doors, thought out strategy being used against Donald Trump to keep him off the ballot. And I appreciate you pointing that out to us. Dave, thank you so much for coming on. Stay in the fight. We'll make sure to put that link to your .org down below. And thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.